Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Um, First of all, thanks for those of you who are joining us. Um, our next session of the Grub Bag Lunchtime Digest. We are happy to have with us Dr. Laura Ingwell, who is an associate professor and specialty crops entomologist in the department. And Laura's done quite a bit of work with cucurbit crops across the state. And so she is going to share with us a high-level overview of cucurbit pests, right? That would be pests of melons, squashes, cucumbers, those kinds of things. And I am going to let her go ahead and share her screen and lots of fabulous information I'm sure she's put together for us.
Thanks, Doug. Okay. All of you disappeared, but hopefully you see my full screen.
No, we do
No.
not.
Really?
Yeah, she's weird.
It's my first time ever trying this, so.
Here it comes.
Okay. Okay, now we're good?
We're good.
Awesome. My computer's trying to push IT updates, so hopefully that doesn't interrupt me too much. Okay, like Doug said, this is a high-level overview. So basically introducing you to the common insects on cucurbit crops and a little bit about management and maybe sort of prioritizing some of them that can cause more damage than others. So the first pest that I'm going to introduce is the squash vine borer. So in my experience, this is a pest that plagues some farms and others have never seen it or see it once every 5 or 10 years. So it definitely regionally depends on whether or not this is something you may be encountering every year. It's a very colorful day flying moth. So you can see this adult on the upper right during the day out on the plants resting on foliage. The damage comes from the fact that they lay their eggs at the base of the plant on the stem, and the egg hatches and the caterpillar larva bore into the stem, giving it its name. And then they essentially break the water and nutrient transport within the stem of the plant. So they can cause this wilting within the vine. And so the way to diagnose squash vine borer is to really investigate at the base of the plant, look for a little entry hole and a buildup of insect frass, which is insect poop. And then you can cut open the stem and look for the caterpillar inside of there. The best way to manage and avoid damage by this pest is to use monitoring tools. So we have pheromone traps, which is the smell of the female moth available commercially in a little plastic lure. You can place that inside of a trap, and that helps you to determine when the insect adult life stages are present in the crop. And you're capturing males in this. So it's males out on the landscape looking for females to mate with, who will then lay the eggs, which causes the damage. So it helps with timing, determining if the pest is present and the timing of when you would want to make applications of pesticides to coordinate with the egg hatch and killing those larvae before they burrow into the stem and cause damage. There's a lot of different types of traps you can use. The most accurate for catching this pest is called a Heliothis trap. So some farmers use it to manage corn earworm. It's really good for catching moths. You want to place this lower on the ground near the canopy of the cucurbit crops, and you secure the lure here on this strap, and the adult male moths are collected up in this container at the top. and you can check it each day to see how many are present in your area or track the adult activity. You can also use bucket traps or sticky card traps, but they are not as effective, meaning that there's more moths on the landscape before you're actually starting to see them in the trap. Um, some years I maintain a statewide squash vine borer network and post that information online for growers to see throughout the state in real time. This year I am not because of funding situations and me not getting summer pay to manage this network. So if individual growers want to do it, I have no problem pointing them to resources so they can do it on their own farm. The next pest, which is probably the most problematic, is cucumber beetles. And I use the term broadly because there's a few different species of beetles that will attack cucurbits. We have the striped cucumber beetle on the right here, which is a strict cucurbit specialist. So this species is only feeding on cucurbits in the environment. We also have the spotted cucumber beetle on the left here on the fruit, which is a generalist and will feed on many other different types of crops, as well as cucurbits. And sometimes you see corn rootworms as they migrate out of corn crops, which can resemble striped cucumber beetles, sometimes feeding on the foliage. But the main one that you need to monitor and be concerned with is the adult striped cucumber beetle. And the reason that it is so damaging to our cucurbit crops is because not only does it do direct feeding by removing large portions of plant foliage or feeding directly on the fruits and creating holes with their chewing mouth parts, but they also transmit a disease called bacterial wilt, Erwinia trachyphylla. And the bacterial wilt gets into the plant and clogs the water transport, which is where the bacteria replicates and causes the plant to wilt and die. And you cannot rescue a plant once it is infected with the bacterium. And so this one can be a little bit tricky because some types of cucurbits are susceptible to the bacteria while others are not. So we have two different thresholds for monitoring that we utilize when we talk about managing this pest. Cucumbers and cantaloupe are the most susceptible and very sensitive to bacterial wilt. So a threshold of 1 beetle per plant is where we suggest that you apply pesticide to manage this pest. Whereas in squash, pumpkin, and watermelon, we're more concerned with the direct damage that the beetle is causing on the crop. And in particular, usually it's late season, that second generation that will feed directly on the fruits and open the fruits for bacterial infections from the environment. But we're not talking about transmission of the plant disease in the vines. So 5 beetles per plant is our threshold in squash, pumpkin, and watermelon. So the life cycle is very predictable for striped cucumber beetles. There are essentially 2 peak activities in the season where adults are out on the landscape. The first is the generation from the previous year, which is overwintering as adults in vegetation. And so in spring, when the weather starts to warm up, they will move out of those overwintering habitats and look for cucurbit plants to feed on, where they will then lay eggs at the base of the plant and the larvae develop in the soil. So if you are planting cucurbits early, in May, I guess I would say late April to the beginning of June, because it's really variable depending on weather. That's when you need to be out and scouting those young seedlings or using a soil drench to protect the young seedlings that you're putting in the field when you're growing cucumbers and cantaloupe. If you plant a bit later than that, you will likely miss that first generation of adults. And then you're looking at more of sort of late July, mid to late July, early August of when adults will be present on the landscape, and you really need to be out in the field scouting again. In between those 2 times, there's larvae in the soil feeding around the root zones of the plants, but you can't really treat at that stage. So we have those two different thresholds, one beetle per plant for cucumbers and cantaloupe, and 5 beetles per plant for squash, pumpkin, and watermelon. This is some work that a previous student, John Turnist, did in our department and published. When you want to try to get that threshold of 1 beetle per plant, you need to be sampling about 26 plants on average in your field, and you should be doing that in a random design so they can fly in and migrate, so checking on the edges and the interior of the field. And if you need that threshold of 5 beetles per plant, the number of samples goes down, and you only need to look at 7 plants. And I just on this slide also have the economic advantages of investing more in scouting as opposed to just spraying preemptively. But that's cucumber beetles. Okay. Squash bug is the next one. And this one, we will start getting a lot of calls in early August, and it's particularly a problem in pumpkins, which are out later in the field each year. So squash bug is identifiable by the egg masses that they lay. They're this bright bronze color and very straight lines clustered. They look quite different as they mature, hatch from the egg and mature to adults. So over on the right here, I have pictures of the various nymphal stages. Again, the adults are overwintering for this insect and they're moving out in spring. They even overwinter on my house, so they can be a pest like other stink bugs are on your structure in winter. The key is to be looking for them earlier in the season. So really encouraging your growers to be looking in May and June on the cucurbits that they have on the landscape and managing those populations when they're low, as opposed to August and September when they have pumpkins in the fields and there's thousands per plant, because that's a little bit too late. And the best way to manage them is with foliar applications of insecticide, and you want to get the nymphs right after hatching. So if you're out and you're scouting for these egg masses that will appear from that overwintering generation, it takes about 10 days to hatch, depending on temperature, and that's when you want to be coming back in and applying an insecticide to get those nymphs. So doing that early in the season prevents those later populations. And more recently, we have identified cucurbit yellow vine decline, which is a disease that impacts cucurbit crops and is transmitted by squash bugs. It may also be transmitted by cucumber beetles, but there's a lot of unknown factors about this pathogen. But Cesar Escalante is working really hard to try to get a better understanding of how common this is in the state. So I just wanted to highlight that if your growers are seeing this sort of bleaching of the plant followed by vine wilting, I highly encourage you to take samples of those plants and send them to the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Lab or directly to Cesar Escalante at SWAPAC so that we can have a good record of where and when this disease is happening. It looks very different than bacterial wilt because the tissue here actually sort of dries up and gets very spongy and corky looking. Whereas if you have bacterial wilt, you'll get this clear bacterial ooze that's coming at those cut stem points. But send this one to the diagnostic lab if you see it. And this is an example about the timing is everything. It's very easy to, or easier, I should say, to manage them if you're timing those applications at egg hatch. And you can see when they first hatch, they can be green and red, turn green and black, and then as they molt, they'll turn into this more gray color and get closer to adults. So trying to make applications when these are aggregated on the plants early in the season will help manage those populations. Aphids are a problem usually when growers are spraying other insecticides for beetles or squash bugs, or when the weather conditions are right. So if we've had a sort of hot and dry summer, aphids can become a problem. Sometimes they transmit diseases in these crops. I think more often we see it in pumpkin than the other cucurbit crops. They, again, go through incomplete metamorphosis, so they look very similar. The things that you want to look for is distortion in the shape of the leaves, This is sooty mold that grows on the surface of the leaves due to the honeydew that they are excreting. And spider mites are the next one. So when the weather is really hot and really dry, or if your farmer is spraying pyrethroids to manage aphids, this insect flares up. There's a lot of work being done in watermelon systems investigating this idea that the rye that is maintained as wind strips, wind breaks to protect the young seedlings are the source of spider mites. And members of Ian Kaplan's lab have shown that that is not the case. So rye is not necessarily the source of mites, and spraying an insecticide when the rye is terminated or mowed down is not needed. What's more important is actually going out in the field and scouting. And spider mites usually balloon on the air or wind into a crop. So looking at the edge of the field from the direction of where the prevailing winds are coming from is a good place to prioritize your scouting for this insect. And learning to recognize this sort of stippling damage that can be caused from their feeding early on. If you wait until you start seeing webbing on the plants, those are very high populations that become harder to manage. If you're growing any cucurbits in protected culture, they are almost guaranteed to be a problem. So knowing that and being really proactive and using beneficial natural enemies early in the season can help to suppress those populations. Again, wind and rain knocks them off the plant and makes them more vulnerable to desiccation, death, and predation. So out in the field, if we have a wet year, spider mites are usually held under control. If we have periods of long, hot, dry weather, they can really take off. And when you put them in a protected environment, you remove those weather factors, and so you get very high populations. White flies is the last pest that I want to mention. It's one that I think as winters get warmer, it has the potential to migrate further and further north. But typically, whiteflies are not a huge problem in our area because they do not overwinter outside. We do see flare-ups and occasional infestations again late in summer, sometimes in these crops, usually in protected environments. The reason that they are a problem is again because they can transmit diseases onto our cucurbit crops. And so if you have whiteflies or aphids in the system, it's important to test those plants to see if there are associated plant viruses. So again, very high level overview. So those are sort of the main pests, the pests that are sort of commonly reoccurring or sporadically occurring in our cucurbits. What I wanted to spend a little time on with this slide is emphasizing the fact that we do have a very robust suite of natural enemies that are on the landscape and do a very good job of managing mites in these crops and to some degree aphids. And so it's important for you to encourage your farmers to recognize when these natural enemies are present on the landscape and be able to determine if they're actually contributing to pest suppression. So on the left side here, I have parasitoid wasps. They do a very good job of managing aphids, but they usually don't find their way into the system until you have a very high population of aphids. So like you can see here, this is actually on a pepper leaf, but almost every aphid on that leaf has been stung by a parasitoid wasp and has had an adult emerge, or there's a wasp still developing in them. And you can tell by the presence of these mummies or these sort of bloated aphid bodies. We also have lacewings that are present, and this is important for growers to recognize that lacewings lay their eggs up on these stalks and are elevated off the plant. And so if they see these present in the crop, it's a good indicator that you have a healthy population of lacewings. The adults aren't actually feeding when it comes to green lacewing, but the larvae are voracious and feeding in the crop. Lady beetles, most people can recognize. This is the minute pirate bug, Aureus insidiosus. People complain about them actually biting them on their arms, but they are a good natural enemy in cucurbit systems. They feed on aphids and mites. And over here on the right, we have some of the fly larvae that are good natural enemies in these systems. So syrphid flies and something called the aphid midge fly or Ophidiolides are quite common and prevalent, especially in protected culture. Saying that because that's where I've done a lot of work. I haven't looked for them as much in the field, but you do find them associated with aphids. And then a whole suite of predatory mites, which I don't have pictured here. But when we tend to find outbreaks of mites in fields, it's because previous pesticide applications have sort of knocked back a lot of these natural enemies, and then those mites can flare up as a result. So being able to recognize and encourage farmers to look for these natural enemies can help, at least when it comes to making decisions about which products to use when you do have to intervene and manage. And for some of these, we have very targeted products or chemistries that can help minimize the impacts on both pollinators and the natural enemies that are in this system. So just some general tips is encourage scouting and early sampling of signs and symptoms to identify problems early in the season. Using pheromone traps when we have them. And so for our cucurbit crops at this point, the only pheromone traps we have are for squash vine borers. There are some plant-based volatile traps for striped cucumber beetles, but the jury's out on whether or not they do a good job of really reflecting the population in the crop. So at this point, we still recommend that you're actually walking in the field and looking for those insects. And when you're scouting for cucumber beetles, you should do it early in the day. As it gets hotter, they will crawl down under the plastic or hide under the plant, and it's harder to find them and get accurate counts. In general, as a rule of thumb, we really want to reduce applications of pyrethroids. So this is things like Warrior, Mustang Max, Hero, at all times. These are old chemistries. They do work well, but they are not friendly for pollinators or natural enemies in the system. And so there's a lot of concern from our farmers about protecting bees in these pollinator dependent crops. And so when possible, use alternatives. So if you're planting early and you know cucumber beetles are a problem, using low rates of a neonic soil application at transplanting is the best practice to manage that early season damage from the beetles. If you have aphids in your crop, using piercing, sucking, insect specific chemistries like flunicimid will help to manage those pests without damaging the natural enemies that are there and helping to reduce mite populations. And you can find this information on the veg guide. So this year in particular, we did not print any, I don't think, for people to purchase. So using the website online is the best option because as labels change, it's updated in real time. We have created a particular guide in particular for high tunnel cucumber production. Doug put a link to that in the chat, as well as a link to the archives for Veg Crops Hotline, where there have been several articles published over the years on these cucurbit pests. And Cesar Escalante, our pathologist, is very interested in getting a better understanding of cucurbit diseases in the state. So I would highly recommend that you are sending samples to the Plant Pest Diagnostic Lab or directly to Cesar, so we have a better understanding of pathogens that are impacting these crops and the potential insect vectors that may be associated. So that's all I have for you, my high-level overview. Doug, I will show them. So I've given a few PARP talks on this topic. So I have created a PDF handout. Maybe you can see this. It's not technically like a published e-series or anything like that. So I don't know the best way to get it to all of you. But it's sort of just a little cheat sheet guide that I have. So I have a table on one side of the handout that is just a snapshot of the pest, their common name, some of the species we get, signs and symptoms. This is the occurrence of like how often am I seeing it or hearing from growers in our region. And then, like, how big of a worry is it? Should I act right away, or is it something that I just can sit and watch because it's not necessarily going to cause damage? So that's what my damage potential is here. And then I've created this sort of abbreviated list of chemistries, active ingredients that you can use in cucurbit systems with the IRAC code to help with rotation. And because growers are concerned about pollinator health, I included in here the bee precaution that comes off of the label of all of these products. So during flowering, you want to use products that are in the green or maybe the yellow, but you want to stick away from the black and the red because they are known to be negatively impact pollinators. And then a table of all of the different pests that are managed by those products. And I would just add to that that sometimes a grower will pick a product like a pyrethroid, which is the 3, because it will get a lot of things in their crop. And that's sort of that mindset of an insurance policy. If the pest is not a problem, it can cause more damage than good. And again, that damage is occurring to pollinators and to the natural enemies in the system. So if mites or aphids are something that are a problem, look for products that are only getting those pests and not everything else. Because I don't know if my other entomology friends would agree with me, but like for me, the general rule of thumb, if the label lists like 400 insects, it's going to be pretty damaging to all insects, right? And as sometimes it's just a matter of labeling guidelines and if the company wants to pay for it, but a lot of times it's whether or not the product actually works against those other organisms. So trying to get things that are directly geared toward or made for the pests that you're actually encountering and minimizing those non-target effects is the best practice, especially in these pollinator dependent crops. So I don't know how to get that to you. It's a PDF that I have. You can put your email in the chat, or if there's a place where you guys post resources, I'm more than happy to share it either on a Microsoft team, or I don't use the intranet, but if that's a thing where people put stuff, I can do that.
I think John has the right idea. Just post your email address quickly in the chat, and we can send it out directly to you now. And then if any of our colleagues want it, they can follow up with Laura, and I'm sure she'll be happy to provide that resource. In addition to the other resources that she's provided that I've simply posted here in the chat. Thanks, Laura. So how about questions? Any questions for Laura over any of this? See if there's
Hi,
anything.
Laura. I've got one question about an insect that you didn't cover, I guess. But my daughter is raising a vegetable garden. I'm real proud of her for doing that. And she ran across, I'm pretty sure it's a leafhopper, but it wasn't the potato leafhopper. It was kind of a brown mottled color. I wondered if that was an aster leafhopper, and um, concerned about aster yellows transmission and those kind of things. Have you run across that very much? This would be in the Indianapolis area.
I am looking at my entomology colleagues that are on here with me. I have not. So there is one sort of brownish leafhopper that I've been seeing more this year as we're growing cut flowers. And we do have like a ornamental daucus, like
Mm,
carrot flower in that group. But I don't have a lot of experience with the types of crops that would get aster yellows.
okay.
Aster yellow. Sophia Cendre in Michigan does a lot of work on that and has like a monitoring tool to some degree about the insect activity and where the disease is popping up. But it's not one that I have received questions about in Indiana.
Okay.
So bottom line is aster yellows doesn't affect cucurbit crops.
Oh, right. Yeah, definitely does. Oh, sorry, I should have maybe started with that. It does not affect cucurbit crops.
Yeah, this was different vegetables, I think. So,
Oh, hmm. Good question though, John. Anybody else have any questions? I have one for you, Laura. So why it's interesting that there's a different threshold for something like cantaloupe versus watermelons. Why is that?
It's
I think you
the,
touched on it, but
yeah,
say a
well,
little more about
so
that.
it comes down to the plant family. Like if you get into the plant taxonomy, watermelon is Citrellus genus. So it's completely separate from cucumber and cantaloupe, which is Q. They all sound the same. It's a different genus altogether, and I could Google it in a second. So, yeah, watermelon is this weird oddball that completely different plant family, no no records of bacterial wilt infection in that crop. Um, Cantaloupe is extremely susceptible, and I think that is maybe also a bit related to the beetles' feeding preferences. Um, but the amount of cantaloupe that's grown in the state has declined a lot, and most of it is watermelons. So I don't get as many questions about cantaloupe as like
Oh,
when I started in 2014 or whatever, and that was because of the big food safety scare thing.
oh. Well, that's unfortunate news.
I
I
don't like cantaloupe, so it's okay.
oh
The
man.
seedless watermelon is better, but yeah, so it's the plant phylogeny
Okay,
background that
that
contributes to
makes
that.
sense. They're different enough that okay,
The bacteria can't replicate in watermelon, but it
interesting.
can in cantaloupe and
And
cucumber.
cucumber. Okay. Um,
I have a quick question,
Yeah.
a nerdy question about the new decline pathogen. Is that a virus or a bacteria? Do we know? Or something else?
I think it's a bacteria. It's a
Okay.
bacteria. Yeah, so there's two labs that have done a lot of work on it. Cornell has and Iowa State has. And so it's a bacteria. I think that it can be seed-borne, but it
Hmm.
has also been shown in a lab setting to be transmitted by squash bugs and by cucumber beetles. In the field, I don't know that cucumber beetle transmission has been verified.
Oh, that's really interesting. Hmm.
And we do have it in Indiana. I think Cesar has had reports for the last 4 years. It's not really widespread, but again, I don't know if people are misdiagnosing it for other diseases or physiological traits.
No. Thank you.
Yeah.
what other questions do we have? And we can make this even more general since we have a number of entomologist colleagues here on the call. Anything else that you're seeing in the field that you want to bring up to get some entomological feedback? Okay. Um, I'm going to launch a quiz real quick, just the one question poll for you. If you take just a minute to fill that out, please, we'll appreciate it for our metrics. Let's see. So I've got, okay, a number of people responding with their emails in the chat. Laura and I will make sure you get that one resource. Please also notice the other three resources that were posted in the chat if you want to bookmark those or whatever, or at least make yourselves aware that we do have resources on cucurbits on the entomological side. All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay, hearing none. Laura, thank you very much. That was great. I learned some new things. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next month. I'll release another notification here probably later this week about the next session. And nice work there, Christian. Um, and I'm not sure what the subject matter will be just yet, but we'll make that apparent to everybody as soon as we can. Okay. Hope everybody's enjoying the extension metamorphosis, as I like to call it, and keeping things in order. And hope you're having a good summer so far. So we'll see you next time. Thank you, Laura.
Welcome.